John slammed his fists on the cryopod, realizing that if he didn't do something quick, everyone aboard the Earth refugee ship ESS Resilience would be enslaved or slaughtered by the massive Hirogen dreadnought locking tractor beams on their hull. Alarms blared and red lights flashed as Marine Sergeant John Baker stumbled out of his cryopod, disoriented and reeling. The ship's AI informed him that his sister, an engineer on the Resilience, had placed him in cryo and smuggled his German Shepherd Daisy and a cache of weapons aboard. He raced to a viewport and stared in dread at the imposing Hirogen ship pulling them in, its raiders already cutting into the Resilience's exterior, ready to board and subjugate the 5,000 fleeing humans. John sprinted for the cargo hold, hoping that whatever his sister had stashed could delay the aliens long enough for them to break free and jump to hyperspace. Around him, the colonist security forces braced for a losing battle, pulse rifles and plastic armor no match for the brutal Hirogen warriors. In the hold, John flung open the weapon cache, jaw dropping at the meager contents. Some basic rifles and launchers, relics against the Hirogen's disruptors and impenetrable armor. His dog Daisy whined and pawed at her cryopod, the serial number matching the Hirogen slave collar on her neck. John froze as realization hit. "What the hell am I supposed to do against a dreadnought with this?" John shouted desperately at Daisy. "Unless—" He opened Daisy's cryopod as the ship shook, the outer hull breached. If John couldn't figure out why his sister had brought his dog, every human aboard would meet the same grim fate as the rest of their species. Hirogen slaves. John grabbed 2 M4 carbines from the weapon cache, tossing one to his sister Lyra as she raced into the cargo bay. Her face was flushed, eyes wide with fear. "The Hirogen breached the command deck. They're heading for the cryo chambers to round up the colonists as slaves," Lyra shouted, catching the rifle. John slammed a magazine into his M4, pulling the charging handle. "Like hell they will, not on my watch." A thunderous boom shook the Resilience, nearly knocking them off their feet. The deck plating vibrated under the impact. The dreadnought had opened fire, no doubt trying to cripple their engines and prevent escape. Daisy shot out of the cargo bay like a furry missile, racing down the corridor toward the cryo chambers. Barking echoed through the passage. John's heart hammered against his ribs as he sprinted after her, Lyra close on his heels. Rounding a junction, they ran headlong into a squad of Hirogen raiders. The aliens opened fire immediately, with crackling disruptor beams that sizzled past John's head, scorching the bulkhead behind him. He and Lyra dove for cover, rolling into doorways on opposite sides of the passage. Popping out, they returned fire, M4s barking. The 5.56mm rounds punched through the raiders' armor like it was tissue paper, spraying blue blood across the walls. The Hirogens collapsed, snarling. John and Lyra advanced, leaping over the bodies. They skidded to a halt as a hulking Hirogen commander stepped out in front of them, a disruptor cannon in his hands. 2 guards flanked him, rifles aimed at the siblings. Before anyone could fire, Daisy blurred past John and launched herself at the commander's throat, a deadly ball of teeth and fur. The guards turned reflexively to help their leader. John and Lyra put them down with precise headshots that blew out the backs of their skulls. The commander roared in pain and rage, his neck a mangled ruin. He flung Daisy aside and brought his cannon to bear on John. Rolling to his feet, John fired from the hip, placing his shots perfectly into the cannon's glowing power cell. The cell exploded in a blinding flash, vaporizing the commander where he stood and hurling John backwards. Lyra grabbed him and hauled him up, pulling him down the passage. They raced into the cryo chamber and skidded to a stop, stomachs twisting. Dozens of Hirogen guards were dragging groggy, helpless colonists out of their pods at gunpoint, barking at them to submit. Daisy let out a vicious snarl and leapt for the nearest guard, powerful jaws clamping down on his gun arm. The Hirogen screamed, bones crunching, as he tried to fight the dog off. Lyra brought her rifle up in one smooth motion and put a bullet through the guard's temple. He crumpled. John pulled the pin on a flashbang grenade and hurled it into the center of the room. The guards yelled in alarm, shielding their eyes. The grenade detonated in a searing white flash, and a deafening bang. As the disoriented guards staggered, John and Lyra opened fire, M4s chattering. They cut the Hirogen down in swaths, bullets stitching gory lines across their chests. A guard rushed at John, knife in hand. The blinding white light of the flashbang faded, leaving the Hirogen guard staggering and disoriented. John and Lyra seized the opportunity, their M4 carbines spitting fire as they methodically eliminated the remaining threats with precise shots to the head and chest. The captive colonists cowered in fear as blue blood sprayed the cryopods. With the immediate danger neutralized, Lyra quickly moved to release the frightened humans from their restraints, helping them out of the pods and checking for injuries. John turned his attention to a wall console, fingers flying over the controls as he tried to assess the resilience's status. Shit! John slammed his fist against the bulkhead in frustration. The display showed the engines were offline, and multiple hull breaches were leaking atmosphere into space. They were dead in the water, at the mercy of the Hirogen dreadnought. A sudden, insistent scratching sound drew John's attention. Daisy was pawing frantically at one of the cryopods, whining and nosing at the release lever. John rushed over, peering through the frosted glass, his eyes widened in shock. Inside was a Hirogen pup, its small body badly wounded and barely clinging to life. Dark blue blood seeped from multiple lacerations, staining the white interior of the pod. John looked at Daisy incredulously, confusion etched on his face. Why the hell would his dog want to save one of the aliens trying to enslave them? Daisy met John's gaze, her brown eyes pleading. She whined again, nosing the release lever more urgently. John hesitated for a long moment, torn between his instinctive hatred for the Hirogen and Daisy's inexplicable insistence. Finally, he let out a frustrated growl and hit the release. The pod hissed open, cold air billowing out. John reached in and carefully extracted the injured pup, laying it gently on the deck. The young Hirogen's eyes fluttered open, and it let out a weak, pitiful yelp. John spotted a strange device affixed to the pup's collar, some kind of universal translator. He activated it with a tap. "Help me," the pup stammered in halting English, its voice thin and reedy with pain. "I am Makar, son of the dreadnought commander. The collar on your beast. It is a translator that allowed her to speak with me." John's brow furrowed in confusion. He glanced at the slave collar on Daisy's neck, realization dawning. It wasn't a collar at all, but a translation device. "Please, you must listen," Makar coughed, flecks of blue blood speckling his snout. "Not all Hirogen agree with this war. A resistance movement has formed, seeking to end the bloodshed. Your companion was aiding me in an attempt to escape after my treachery was discovered. I beg you, do not let my sacrifice be in vain." Suddenly alarms blared throughout the ship, red lights flashing urgently. John's blood ran cold as he checked the sensor readout on the wall console. A dozen more Hirogen warships had just dropped out of hyperspace, weapons hot and heading straight for the crippled Resilience. John scooped up Makar and thrust him into Lyra's arms. "Get to the bridge," he ordered, handing her his rifle. "See if you can bring the engines back online. We need to get the hell out of here." Lyra nodded grimly, clutching Makar and the weapon as she sprinted out of the cryo chamber. John turned to Daisy, a desperate plan forming in his mind. The weapons his sister had smuggled aboard were woefully inadequate against the might of the Hirogen fleet, but maybe, just maybe, there was another way. There was. Together, John and Daisy raced through the corridors of the Resilience, making for the hangar bay. John's heart pounded in his ears as they ran, his mind racing. This was a long shot, but it was the only chance they had. They burst into the hangar, skidding to a halt. John's eyes darted around, taking in the scene. The Resilience's own shuttles and transports were docked alongside several Hirogen boarding craft, their hatches yawning open. John sprinted for the nearest Hirogen shuttle, Daisy close on his heels. He leapt aboard, making a beeline for the engine compartment. Daisy took up a guard position at the hatch, ears pricked for any sign of danger. Ripping open an access panel, John began frantically jury-rigging the shuttle's engines, sweat beading his brow as he worked. Sparks flew from severed wires and overloaded circuits, as he rerouted power and bypassed safeguards. It was slapdash and crude, but if his hasty calculations were correct, it just might work. With deft hands, John Baker wired the final connection, then closed the access panel with a resounding clang. He turned to Makar, who was propped against the bulkhead, holding a spanner in his trembling paw. "The shuttle's engines are set to overload," John said, wiping sweat from his brow. "I've programmed the autopilot to ram it straight into the command ship's bridge." Makar nodded weakly, his breathing shallow. "A fitting end for my traitorous father." John helped the pup to his feet, supporting his weight as they limped out of the shuttle. Daisy bounded ahead, ears pricked for danger. The hangar shook violently as the Resilience took a barrage of fire from the approaching hydrogen fleet, the deck buckling beneath their feet. Makar cried out as he was flung from John's grasp, a heavy beam crashing down and pinning his leg. Daisy raced to the pup's side, whining as she pawed at the debris. John heaved against the beam with all his strength, but it wouldn't budge. Suddenly the hangar bay doors exploded inward with a deafening boom, twisted metal flying through the air. A squad of heavily armed hydrogen warriors charged through the smoke, disruptor rifles blazing. John dove for cover, yanking Daisy back by the scruff of her neck as a plasma bolt sizzled past, singeing her fur. He spotted a plasma welder lying near a damaged shuttlecraft and snatched it up, aiming the nozzle at a ruptured coolant line. Searing liquid sprayed the advancing hydrogen, their screams of agony echoing through the hangar as the superheated fluid melted through their armor like acid. They fell back, writhing on the deck. John rushed to Makar's side, heart hammering as he took in the severity of the pup's injuries. Dark blood pooled beneath the debris, Makar's breathing shallow and labored. With a trembling paw, Makar pressed a small data chip into John's palm, his voice a rasping whisper. "For the Resistance," he breathed, then went limp, eyes staring sightlessly at the hangar ceiling. Blinking back tears, John pocketed the chip and gathered Daisy in his arms, sprinting for the bridge. He burst onto the command deck, shouting for Lyra. "Punch it," he yelled, strapping himself into the weapons console. Lyra slammed the throttle forward, and the Resilience surged ahead, narrowly evading the encroaching warships. John opened fire with every operational weapon, the hull shuddering as missiles and plasma bursts streaked toward the Hirogen fleet. On the view screen, the rigged shuttle hurtled toward the command ship, its engines glowing white-hot. John held his breath, thumb poised over the detonator. At the last possible second, the command ship swerved, and the shuttle exploded harmlessly against its shields. "No!" John pounded the console in frustration as the hydrogen warships, undamaged, closed in for the kill. Lyra's hands flew over the controls, desperately trying to coax more speed from the damaged engines. The deck shuddered as the Resilience took another hit, sparks cascading from overloaded circuits. Alarms blared, red lights flashing as the ship groaned under the onslaught. John gritted his teeth, squeezing the trigger again and again until the weapons console went dark, its ammunition spent. He looked up at the view screen, watching helplessly as the Hirogen ships loomed ever larger, their disruptor cannons glowing as they prepared to deliver the final blow. The Hirogen ships loomed on the view screen, their disruptor cannons glowing ominously as they prepared to obliterate the Resilience. Lyra's fingers flew across the console, beads of sweat trickling down her face as she fought to divert every scrap of power to the failing shields. "Rerouting life support to forward deflectors," she shouted over the blaring alarms. "Shields at 20% and dropping fast." John gritted his teeth, squeezing the trigger again and again. The Resilience's weapons spat streams of plasma and missiles, but they splashed harmlessly against the warship's impenetrable armor. Suddenly Daisy leapt up, planting her paws on the console and pawing frantically at John's chest. He looked down, confused, until he saw the data chip Makar had given him just before he died. With trembling fingers, John plugged the chip into the console. Makar's face appeared on the screen, his voice strained but urgent. "Baker, if you're seeing this, I didn't make it, but there's still a chance." Schematics of the Hirogen ships flashed across the display, zooming in on a specific point in their shield generators. The warships have a critical flaw in their shield oscillation frequency, Makar explained. The Resistance discovered it, but couldn't exploit it without access to Hirogen systems. Sync this data with your targeting computer. It's the only way. John's heart raced as he uploaded the information, watching the targeting reticle flicker and reposition over the lead warship. He stabbed the firing control. The Resilience's weapons blazed, lances of pure energy slicing through space. They phased straight through the warship's shields as if they weren't even there, striking its reactor core. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the warship detonated in a blinding flash, a miniature sun blossoming into existence and vanishing just as quickly. Flaming debris pinwheeled through the void. The remaining Hirogen ships reeled back in momentary confusion, their formation breaking apart. "Punch it," John roared. Lyra slammed the hyperdrive controls, and the stars outside the view screen blurred into streaks of light as the Resilience leapt into warp. The inertial compensators whined in protest, the deck shuddering beneath their feet. John collapsed back into his chair, exhaling heavily. He looked down at Daisy, a sad smile tugging at his lips. "He did it," he murmured. "Makar gave us a fighting chance." The respite was short-lived. Proximity alarms shrieked, jolting John back to full alertness. The warp tunnel outside the viewports flickered and died, replaced by the darkness of real space. An asteroid tumbled past, missing the Resilience by mere meters. More followed, the ship shuddering as smaller rocks pinged off the hull like hail. "We've dropped out of warp in the middle of an asteroid field," Lyra reported, her knuckles white on the controls. "It's interfering with our sensors. I can't get a clear reading." The Hirogen ships burst out of warp, emerald beams of disruptor fire lancing out to blast the tumbling asteroids into clouds of lethal shrapnel. A chunk of rock the size of a shuttle spun towards the Resilience, Lyra throwing the ship into a desperate roll. The asteroid slammed into the Resilience's flank, alarms screaming as the warp drive sputtered and died. John watched in horror as the Hirogen cruisers closed in for the kill, their shadows falling over the crippled ship. Daisy whined, pawing at his arm as he reached for the self-destruct. She nosed insistently at the comms panel, and he hesitated, a frown creasing his brow. "What is it, girl?" The dog barked urgently, and John's eyes widened as he saw the indicator light flashing on the console. He stabbed the control to open the channel. "This is Sergeant John Baker of the ESS Resilience. We are under attack and require immediate assistance. Does anyone copy?" Static crackled across the channel, and John's heart sank. But then, remarkably, a voice responded, a human voice. "Heard you could use a hand," the voice drawled, the casual tone at odds with the desperate situation. "This is Captain Jack Cooper of the freelance freighter Deliverance. Looks like you've got some angry pups nipping at your heels." John barked a relieved laugh as a battered old freighter shimmered into view, its cloaking field dissolving to reveal the angular lines of a Firefly-class transport. It settled into formation beside the Resilience, maneuvering thrusters flaring. "We're extending our docking tube," Cooper informed them. "Get your people aboard quick as you can. We'll hold off your friends while you evacuate." John turned to Lyra, a fierce grin spreading across his face. "You heard the man. Get our people to the airlock. Double time." As the survivors rushed across the docking umbilical, John paused to scoop up Daisy, burying his face in her fur. "I thought I'd lost everything," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "but I still have you." He felt a hand on his shoulder and looked up to see Lyra, her eyes glistening. "We have to go," she urged softly. With a final glance around the bridge, John followed his sister through the airlock, Daisy cradled in his arms. The Resilience seemed to shudder in farewell as the umbilical detached. From the viewport of the Deliverance, they watched as their home for the past 3 years erupted into a ball of fire, the explosion engulfing the remaining Hirogen ships in a maelstrom of destruction. Slumping against the bulkhead, John surveyed the haggard faces of the refugees, seeing the same mix of relief, grief, and uncertainty that he felt himself. Earth was lost, the colony ship gone. The future was a daunting blank slate. But as Daisy licked his hand and he met the steady gazes of Lyra and their new allies, he felt a flicker of hope amid the ashes. The battle was over. The war had just begun, and they would fight it together to the bitter end. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.